Hi everyone, and welcome to the third session where we are meeting for the SBL Success Batch for the June 2026 attempt. Guys, this is going to be our third session. So, we've already had two sessions before where we have covered about the very first chapter that is about strategy. So, can we get started quickly by revising what all did we cover the last time we met yesterday? So, can you quickly let me know what all topics do you people remember studying from yesterday? I always tell you to come to the class when you have revised everything of the previous session. Let me know quickly just the overview. What all topics did we cover yesterday? Yes, right. Simi, we started off with the pricing strategies. We learned about penetration, skimming, and we learned about the porters value change. We learned about the KPIs, the CSFs. So we started off over here where we had covered the different pricing strategies. So penetration, skimming, discrimination. Then we spoke about CSFs and KPIs. Then we spoke about strategic capability of a company. Then we also moved ahead and went on to learn about data, information, and knowledge. They are not the same. We learned about the hierarchy also. Data is the most basic. When we process data, it becomes information. When we process information further, it then becomes knowledge. Then we discussed what all parts are there in any knowledge management system. Then we covered the Porter's value chain analysis, and post that we moved ahead with the BCG matrix and the Ansoff matrix. Absolutely right, you guys. So these are the things that we had covered in the last session. Now we are going to proceed further where we are learning. Now, this chapter is all about strategy. Strategy means how the company is going to achieve the goals that they have planned for themselves. So that means sometimes whenever I want to achieve my goal, I will also have to do diversification. Now, you people will tell me what exactly do we mean by diversification? First, we have to understand the meaning and then we can talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So, can you people let me know what do we mean by diversification? Yes, guys, what do we mean by diversification? Okay, great. Investing in different areas. Tanisha says it's variety. Absolutely right, you guys. Diversification means when I'm doing something which is completely different from what I do right now. So, for example, right now I have a grocery store. Now I am starting a tourism company, or now I have a grocery store. I'm getting into the jewelry business. I'm opening a bank. So, these are all different industries altogether. So, when I am investing in different areas, opening up my business in different areas, different industries, that is when we say that it is diversification. So the best example that we have previously also took for many of our concepts is Reliance Industries. They are into the manufacturing, they are into the retail business. Within retail also, they have the communication networks, they have the telecom services, they have the clothing and apparel related brands. So these are the diversification that they've done. Different businesses that they are running at the same time. Now, for any business, diversification may be one of the solutions. As a strategy, I may think that if I want to grow my company, I will have to go for diversification. Now, guys, whenever you take any decision, like how there are, whenever you flip a coin, there are two sides. Anything can happen. So, same way with diversification also. If I do that, some things will be beneficial for me, but some things can also harm me. So, what would be the advantages? What would be the disadvantages? Let's discuss about that. So if a company is thinking that to grow, to achieve our objectives, let's have a strategy that we will be diversifying. So we are a grocery business. Now we will be starting maybe with a jewelry business. So what will be the advantages? First of all, my revenues will increase, and if my business goes well, my profits can also increase. So for example, if I add a new product line, it will help me increase my sales. Another benefit that I get is the economies of scale. So whenever I am producing more number of units, my per unit cost is going to get reduced. The maths is very simple. For example, I operate in a factory where I have $50,000 worth of rent. Earlier, I was producing 100 units. So the fixed cost per unit was 50,000 divided by 100, which was $500 per unit. Now what I do is, because of this new business, I am producing 500 units. So 50,000 divided by 500. That means my per unit cost has fallen down to $100 per unit. So this is the concept of economies of scale. Whenever I am producing at a large scale, my per unit cost tends to fall down. Then another benefit that I'm getting is my risk is getting spread. How? So for example, right now I have a grocery business. I'm investing into the jewelry business. Now guys, jewelry is something which people buy when the economy is in a good state. What do you people think? When economy is going through a recession, will people be buying a lot of jewelry? Will that be possible? When people do not have the money to eat their food, will they go out and buy jewelry? Think and tell me. No, right? The priority will be given to the food and the other necessary items. So whenever, if I'm only doing one business, I am facing the risk that when that one industry does bad, I am going to lose out on money. But when my business is diversified, I'm into different industries. Even if one industry is disturbed, other industries will still be well working. Because of that, my losses which were going to happen, they will somehow get compensated with the other industries. Another example which I can give you, people, take the very recent example of the COVID pandemic, right? So we've all been there in that pandemic. What happened? Whenever we got this information, as soon as this information came that COVID has hit and there's going to be a lockdown. So we saw that all of the travel related companies, the airlines, the hotels, they all completely had to shut down because the government had put lots and lots of restrictions on travel. Travel was only allowed if it was essential for you, right? So now, if I only had an airline business, I would be making crazy amount of losses. But then if I had a grocery store also, grocery store fell under the essential items. So the government had allowed the essential service providers and goods providers to open. So if I only had a airline business, then I would be in very big trouble. But if I have both businesses, I have an airline business also and I have a grocery shop also, then definitely my airline business will be making losses, but some of those losses, if not all, will get compensated by the income that I will receive from my grocery stores. So this is how diversification helps you spreading the risk over different businesses that you own. So if one business fails or if one business is on a lesser demand, you will not face a lot of difficulty. So the example is selling in multiple markets reduces the dependence on one market. So for example, if right now I am selling only in India, maybe I can think to sell in other countries also outside of India. So this way I'll be able to spread my risk. Another thing is the synergies. What do we mean by synergies? The very classic example to remember synergies is 1 plus 1 is not equal to 2, it's equal to 11. When things are combined together, they become very much impactful. They become much better to use and to get the things done. So for example, whatever business I was earlier operating, now I have some connections, I have some suppliers, I have my distributors, some courier providers who have been working with me for such a long period of time. Now, when I start a new business, I can use my same contacts, my same delivery providers, my same courier services. So whatever work I have been doing yet till now so far, that work will also come into my use for this new business that I am setting up. So my shared distribution network between the two brands will help me do my business much faster in much more convenience. So these are some of the positives. These are some of the advantages that if as a business I am going for diversification, that is investing into different units, into different services, different industries altogether, these could be some of the benefits that I can get. But nothing in the world will ever come just with advantages. It will have some of the problems, some of the disadvantages also. What is the problem? Firstly, there can be a high risk. So when we were discussing that to spread the risk, I can sell into multiple markets. I can sell right now, if I'm in India, I can sell in US, UK, so on and so forth. But there's a high risk over there that whenever I move into a new country, my new country venture can fail because of lesser demand. So for example, if I'm selling maybe some spicy food over here in India, and then I go to UK, I go to US and I sell the same product, it's not going to have a lot of demand because we Indians, especially the Southeast Asians, we have a tolerance for spices, but the people who are living in UK, people who are living in US, they do not like such spicy food like we do. So there's a heavy risk that if you're going to a new country, you may fail because of demand being lesser or any XYZ reasons. Another thing is a lack of experience. If you start to do something completely new, for example, you have been into your grocery store business for 30 years. It's a very old family business. But now suddenly you're thinking that I'll launch a clothing brand or I'll launch an electronics store. Then you do not have any experience running that store. So because you do not have any experience, if it was something related to groceries, you know the industry in and out because you've been doing that work for a very long time. But when you are doing something completely new, the lack of experience also becomes a disadvantage. So many problems you will face for the first time, and you will have to navigate how do you solve those problems. So if there's a clothing brand which is entering the electronics market without any expertise, it will be difficult because they know about clothing, all the things, but they do not know much about electronics. So this is one of the possible problems. Another problem is the management related issues or the problems. What do we mean by that? For example, right now, the people in my employees, I had 100 employees in my company. They were all focusing on my grocery store business. Now, suddenly, when I'm opening my jewelry business also, I am asking the same set of employees to work on both of the businesses. So what can happen whenever I am asking the same people to work for two businesses at the same time, it will increase the complexity. People will have to do more work. They will have to learn new things, which they may not be the best at. So I might have to spend time training. I might have to increase the salaries, so on and so forth. So these could be some of the problems which can be faced in case I am going for diversification, right? Further, we can also be going ahead with international diversification. As I was telling you people that because I want to do something new, now I'm going into another country altogether, going to multiple different countries outside my own country. So we can use the things which we have learned so far in this chapter. You people remember studying the pestle analysis, which we did in the very first session. So to check the country factors on a macro level, I can use the pestle analysis. For example, if let's suppose I'm over here sitting in India and I'm thinking to launch a business in UAE. So pestle analysis will help me find out what are the rules and regulations, what is the culture like before I enter into a completely new country altogether. Then I can study my micro environment using the Porter's 5 forces. So for example, if I am, let's suppose, entering into the retail market in UK, so I can check what is the competitive intensity. How many competitors do I have? How much of market share does each of my competitor hold? I can use the Porter's 5 forces model to analyze my micro environment. Then guys, there are always other factors with respect to international diversification. There are risks. We face country-related risk. Country-related risk means if there are some rules or regulations which change with respect to the country. So for example, right now, it's the perfect time that we are seeing that countries all over the world, the diplomacy is changing. New friends and new enemies are taking shape because of the current conflict that we are seeing in the Middle East region. So different countries changing their rules overnight. Trump has announced a lot of rules and regulations related to the immigrants. So suddenly these changes can be made in different countries and it can be a problem for your business. Another thing is with respect to the currency. Now guys, if you are here based in India, now whenever you're going outside of your country, let's suppose you're going to Dubai. So if you're going to Dubai, dirhams is the currency that they use over there. So India, we use Indian rupees. Dubai, they use dirhams. So the exchange rates also keep on fluctuating. So for example, when I earned money in dirhams, let's suppose I earned 10,000 dirhams, right? So when I actually went from my country, the exchange rate looks something like this, that if I give 1 INR, or sorry, if I give 50 INR, then I used to get 1 dirham. So guys, if I have earned 10,000 dirhams, then if I multiply that with 50, that means I have earned 5 lakhs of rupees in the Indian currency. But what happens is, let's suppose I was waiting that when the year will come to an end, then I will withdraw my money and send it back to my family in India. So now when the year has come to an end, maybe the exchange rate has fluctuated. What has the exchange rate become now? Exchange rate now has become 48 Indian rupees for 1 dirham. Right? So what will happen now when I convert the 10,000 dirhams that I have in my pocket, I will multiply this with 48. So that will give me 480,000 or 4,80,000 rupees. So you can see that even though the profit that I had made was same in both of the cases, that was 10,000 dirhams, but just because the currency keeps on appreciating, keeps on depreciating, because of this, my profits can get reduced when I am transferring back to India. So this is another very big factor whenever I'm going for international diversification. Then definitely internal factors also have to be considered. My human resources, my finance, my information technology, as well as my brand. If I want to expand myself globally, I need to have a strong brand name, and I also have to have a lot of money, because when I am trying to go global, I need a lot of money to expand into multiple different markets. Then if I am going ahead with international diversification, again, what could be some of the advantages? I can get cheaper labor, cheaper raw material. So you can see mostly all of the European companies, they are coming over here in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka to set up their manufacturing hubs, because they know that labor over here is cheap. In Europe, there are very strict rules and you have to pay a very high amount of minimum wage rate to the workers. So that's why they come over here in India, in the countries neighboring us, because they will get the labor very cheap over here, and even the raw materials will be cheaper. So manufacturing being shifted to Vietnam is one of the examples. Like I'm telling you, the other countries, Vietnam is also one of the countries, Thailand, Philippines. These are all countries where companies go to minimize on their costs. Further, an advantage can be favorable laws or the tax related policies. So for example, we have all known that Dubai for the longest time was a tax free zone for the companies. The government was inviting people to come over here in Dubai, set up their businesses, and they will not have to pay any taxes. Right now, they have changed the rules. They have started to levy taxes, but it's still a very lesser amount of tax compared to what you have to pay if you're doing a business in other countries. So setting up your headquarters in a tax-friendly jurisdiction. This is a real life example. Further, now these are the positives. There will be negatives also. First is the legal differences or the complications. So for example, in different countries where I'm operating, for example, I am based in Europe, I have a Spanish company, and now I'm doing my manufacturing in Vietnam. So you people tell me, when I talk about the laws, when I talk about the rules and regulations, will they be same as in Spain as well as the same in Vietnam? What do you people think? The rules, the laws, will they be same in Spain and Vietnam? Is it necessary? Come on, guys, tell me, will the rules and regulations, the laws be same in both of the countries, Spain and Vietnam? What do you guys think? Guys, I'm not getting any responses. I'll not be able to teach you people this way. The rules and regulations are definitely going to be different in different countries. So there can be an increase in my compliance related costs. Compliance means companies, wherever they are doing their businesses, they have to keep proving that yes, we are following the rules and regulations. So when I am operating in multiple different countries, I constantly have to have this headache that, oh my God, by mistake, I may violate the laws of one or the other country. So this can be one of the problems. Another thing is the cultural differences. So marketing messages that will work in India, but they might not work in Japan because India and Japan have very different cultures. So the cultural differences, like I was giving you the spicy example also, spices work well over here in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan. But when you go towards the European countries, when you go towards the American countries, then it is difficult because the culture over there, the taste preferences that they have, they do not prefer to have a lot of spicy food. So the culture differences also do impact the way your business is going to be if you go ahead with the international diversification. Are you all with me till here? This was the concept of diversification, guys. Okay, great. So now we move forward to understanding some of the further more strategies if I want to have a growth in my company. So how possibly can I grow? There are three other strategies that we can talk about. One is the internal organic growth. Organic means I am not doing anything unnatural. Whatever I have with me, I am using that to grow. So what could be the example for that? I open 10 new stores using my own funds and my operations. So I do not go to another company. I do not go to another, XYZ factors. Whatever money I have with me, I use that money to expand. So this is called as internal organic growth. So what happens over here? I need lesser funds. This is less risky. No management issues are going to happen. You people will see how management issues happen when we discuss about acquisition and strategic alliances. Slow growth, definitely whenever you're doing something organically, it's meant to be slow. Slow economies of scale, because how do economies of scale happen? When you produce at a large number of units. So if you're growing slowly, then the number of units that you're producing are also growing slowly. So your economies of scale will also be slow. It does not eliminate your competitors. That means even if you're trying to grow on your own, your competitors will still be there. They will try to do some things so that your growth is not possible. And it is not suitable for entering into the foreign countries. Internally, I may not have the right expertise to go ahead in a foreign country completely on my own when I don't know anybody over there. Now, what are some of the other alternatives that we can have? One alternative that we can have is acquisition. Acquisition means when I am going out and buying another company completely. So we recently saw Facebook doing it. Facebook has acquired Instagram and they also acquired WhatsApp. Collectively, what is the company called now? Do you guys know that? Collectively, what is? Yes, it's Meta. Absolutely right, Archit. Meta is the group, it's the umbrella under which your Instagram, WhatsApp, all of the platforms that you're using are combined over. So what will be the benefits over here? This will give you a quick, rapid growth. Why? Because you went out to the market and you bought another business. So their customers are now your customers. Their revenue is now your revenue. So you are going to grow very, very fast compared to organic growth when you were only using your own money. So then the growth was slow, but in acquisition, I can grow very fast. My economies of scale will also be quicker because now I will have more number of units, more number of customers. My costs will get divided over more number of units or customers. I will also be able to eliminate my competitors because they are now a part of my own, right? I have acquired them. So if Facebook used to be a competition of Instagram or WhatsApp was giving a competition to Instagram and Facebook, now when you acquire everything, you have become the owner. So now there's no other competition that is left. This is well suited for entering into the foreign countries. Why? Because if, let's suppose I'm over here sitting in India and I want to start a business in UK. So what's the best thing I can do? I can acquire a UK based company. Now this company who is working in UK, they already know all of the rules and regulations. They already know the culture of the place. So when I acquire this company, they will be in a better position to tell me that what is going to work in UK markets, what is going to fail in those markets. So this is suited if I want to enter into foreign countries. Now, obviously, this is not something which is the perfect solution because this also has some problems. What are the problems? You are going out and buying another brand. Will that be very cheap? No, it requires a huge amount of money. If you check about how much Facebook paid to acquire WhatsApp, to acquire Instagram, the money I'm sure is going to be in billions of dollars, right? So this is a very expensive way. A large amount of money is required for this. This is also quite risky because there are chances that you can fail. Any business all around the world is definitely going to be risky in some way or the other. Some businesses are more risky, some businesses are lesser risky. Why does it become more risky? Because here you are putting in a lot of money. So if at all you fail, all of the money that you have put in, that is going to go to waste. Then management cultural issues can be there. So you people know how different companies around the world, they operate in their own different manners. If I talk about Deloitte, they may have some other softwares that they use. If I talk about KPMG, they might use the different softwares to do the same sort of work. So softwares is just one example. The way that they manage the people, the way the office policies are scheduled or they are created, everything is different company to company, right, guys? So whenever I am acquiring another company, the people, let's suppose I'm here in India, I acquire a UK firm. Now, in UK, it's pretty normal for those British people to just shut down their laptop as soon as it's 5 p.m. and it's off for them. They do not work beyond 5 p.m. That's what the usual culture is over there. But here in India, you're expected to work for even late duration of hours. So if I expect them to do the same thing suddenly, over the last 20 years, 25 years, the UK employees, they are shutting down their laptop at 5 p.m. But then right now, when I have acquired that company, I'm telling them that no, you have to work till 11 a.m. What do you people think? Will it be very easy to manage a company like that? What do you guys think? Will that be very easy for the UK people to adapt to? For me to adapt that, oh my God, they're shutting down their laptops at 5 p.m.? No, this will be very difficult. So this is another problem with acquisition. Another thing is the skills required. So I will have to do the due diligence. What do we mean by due diligence? It's like verification. So if I'm acquiring this UK company, I am sitting over here in India. I do not know whether even they are existing in UK or not, or whatever things they are telling me. Are they telling me the truth or are they lying to me? Are they sugarcoating the things to me that we are the largest service provider in UK? So I have to get the verification done. That is due diligence. I have to value the company. Obviously, whenever I'm buying something, I need to know its right value also. If according to me, something is worth $1 million and the company is asking me to pay $2 million, I will not do that. So we are going to have to do a negotiation. So negotiation skills will be needed and integration plan will also have to be prepared. Earlier, the India company used to be a company on its own. UK company used to be a company on its own. Now, when cultures are different, the way of working is different, then if I want to combine both of these companies together, I have to prepare a plan. So in this plan, I will lay down all of the details that in slow and phased manner, we will make all of these changes. We will slowly combine together as one single company. So this plan, it's called as the integration plan, where we are dealing with the changes in a slow and phased manner so that it's easier for everyone to adapt to the changes. So this is about acquisition. Then another option with the companies when they want to grow is doing a joint venture or entering into a strategic alliance. So you people know what is joint venture? When two people come together and they form a third company. That is what is a joint venture. Strategic alliance is two companies coming together and doing their business as one single name. So it may be a combination of both of their names. So earlier what used to happen? Sony was one company in its own. Ericsson used to be one company. What did they do? They combined together, they came into a strategic alliance and they formed a company called the Sony Ericsson company. So what did they do? They combined the strengths of both of the companies. So when they did that, they were able to acquire a lot of customers. They were able to increase their business quite significantly. Another example in front of you is Spotify partnering with telecom companies. So all of you, at least over here in India, yes, Maruti Suzuki is a great example, Archit. Two companies coming together. So if we talk about over here in India, when you go to your Paytm application, it will show you different offers that if you recharge with Jio, you will get this much of services free. So Jio Cinema is free for you to watch. Or if you are, let's suppose, subscribing for Airtel recharge, then you will be getting Spotify, the premium version 1 year for free. So this is how they come together so that they are able to get a lot of business. So this helps both of the companies. Just because I'm getting a Spotify premium subscription, I will subscribe to an Airtel payment plan. And if, let's suppose, Spotify, what is the benefit that they are getting? Once I am getting the habit of using the premium model, once the subscription ends, the free subscription ends, now because I have gotten used to listening to my music without ads, next time when the subscription, the free plan is over, I will subscribe again because now I am into the habit of listening to all of my music completely ad free. So this is beneficial. It's a win-win situation for both of the companies. Very good example given by Archit also over here. Maruti and Suzuki, there are two companies, they came together to sell cars over here in India, and we all know how big of a success it is in India. So many consumers in India buy the Maruti Suzuki cars. But right now, if we see, the competition definitely is increasing with lots and lots of foreign brands coming into the picture here in India. The competition is definitely getting tough. But if you talk about the earlier times, Maruti Suzuki at one point in time, they used to be the king in the Indian market when the cars were concerned. So these are some of the different strategies that companies can use whenever they want to grow. You're all with me till here? Any doubts, any concerns? Keep dropping in examples that you people might think are relevant to what we are discussing. Simi, you're with me? All good? Simi, you're with me? Okay, great. So now we proceed forward towards the next concept of franchising. How many of you have heard this term before? Franchising or franchisee? Okay. Anyone who would like to give a brief explanation? What do you guys understand with a franchisee? What do you guys understand with a franchisee? What does it mean? Even just a basic rough explanation will be enough. Using the other's name. Okay, very well. So some of the examples you people can see right in front of you: Domino's, McDonald's, Pizza Hut. They are all brands which are originally from US, but we have all of the countries around the world that there are. They have their franchisees in their country. So can you people give me some other examples of brands that you see the franchisee model working with? Haldiram, Burger King. Yes, very good. Haldiram is one of the Indian brands that we have. Even the Bikano, Bikaner Wala, these are all brands which are popular, and then they give out their franchises to the others. Yes, natural ice creams, KFC. Yes, very good, guys, very good. So, this is the core concept of franchising. What happens? Let's suppose I'm the founder of Domino's, right? So, now people really love my pizzas and they are willing to pay extra just because of my name. So, what happens is, I, as one person, I cannot be present at one single time in all the different countries around the world. So what do I do is I call up my friend Archit in India and I tell him, hey, listen, I have this very good reputed brand called Domino's. I sell pizzas and people are crazy over here. Would you want to give it a shot in India? So Archit says, yeah, why not? Let's try that out. So I tell him that we can do one thing. You can buy the franchisee from me. That means I will give you the right to use my brand name, my brand recipes, my brand logos, and you can sell those pizzas in India, right? So we go ahead with it and it works really, really well because the name itself is very, very popular. So both of the parties are benefiting. How? I am benefiting because I took a very heavy one-time franchisee cost from Archit, and Archit is benefiting because whatever profits he is making from the restaurant, he gets to keep that. And just because he has my name, he's able to get a large number of customers. So this is the core concept of franchising. We will talk about franchising from both perspectives, from the perspective of the franchisor and from the perspective of the franchisee. So the person who gives the franchisee is called as franchisor, and the person who takes the franchisee is called as franchisee, right? So the person who is giving his franchisee, so for example, if I am the owner of Domino's, what will be the positives, what will be the negatives for me? How is it going to look like for me? So first of all, as a brand, I will be able to expand very fast because more and more people, Archit is my friend in India, I have some other friends in other countries, so they will open a business in my name, in Domino's name, right? So my brand is going to expand very fast. This will be a very good benefit. But at the same time, guys, if let's suppose Archit and the other people who have opened a Domino's using my name, if they are not providing with the good quality products and services, what do you think will happen to my brand? What do you guys think will happen to my brand? The reputation will be down. The brand value will go down, my goodwill will be down, my reputation will be spoiled. So as a franchisor, I definitely enjoy the benefit of expanding in a very fast manner, but it is my responsibility to ensure the quality of the franchisee. So what do I do for that? I prepare very strict SOPs, the standard operating procedures for Archit and for others to follow. So I tell them this thing has to be done this way. A McDonald's patty you have to fry in this particular manner. The garlic bread will be baked at this temperature for these many minutes in the oven. So this is how I try to maintain, to monitor the quality that the other people who have taken a franchisee from me are going to use. So some of the benefits will be I will be able to grow very quickly geographically. So different countries around the world will suddenly have Domino's, which is my brand. I will also need lesser capital. Why? Because if I myself open these restaurants in different countries, I will go crazy. I will need a huge amount of money. But if others are doing it for me, then I will be needing lesser capital. My availability of local expertise is going to help me. What do I mean by local expertise? I am the expert at making pizzas. So I can use my knowledge, give that to others so that I and as well as the other people can make good amount of profits. And the risk is also lesser. Why? Because I am using lesser of my capital. I have received my franchisee payment. Now, whether the restaurant works or not, that is going to be Archit's headache. So this is why I am facing a very lesser risk over here. But then again, there will be disadvantages also. Firstly, like I was giving you people the example that if Archit is not following the rules properly, he is giving burnt pizzas to the customers, garlic bread does not taste good, chocolava cake is half baked and half unbaked. So if the quality that he is providing is not good, then I am done for. Nobody is going to come to Domino's. So I have a very high dependency on the franchisee's performance. So if somebody else is not performing nicely, I will be badly impacted because of that. So it becomes a problem. There's also a confidentiality risk. My recipes may get leaked. So for example, the way that I bake my pizzas, the recipe that I use for the other products that I sell at Domino's, whenever I am giving a franchisee to somebody, I will have to share my exact recipes. I will have to share my exact processes. So there are chances that they will be leaked. So this is something which actually helps me make my money. So if people get to know how Domino's makes pizzas, so they will not come to Domino's anymore. They will simply make it at their houses. So a confidentiality risk happens over here. Quality might suffer definitely, because no matter how much guidance I am giving, how many rules I am setting, I fully cannot guarantee that how the franchisee is going to perform. Reputational risk is always going to be there. What do we mean by that? In case one bad thing happens at one of the Domino's restaurant, all of the other restaurants around the world are also going to suffer. So if there's one bad news about one single outlet, everyone is going to be impacted. The brand's reputation will come at the stake. There's also a conflict of interest, or there are chances of dispute. So what can happen is, if let's suppose Archit took a franchisee from me and then he has gotten all of my recipes and everything, what does he do is suddenly he decides that he will shut down the Domino's that he has opened. In the same place, he will open his another new business, which will be of a different name, but he will still use my recipes, my knowledge, my experience to get a large number of customers. So then disputes can happen. Conflict of interest can happen. Archit will think, why should I run the franchisee? I already know the recipe. When I'm running the franchisee, I have to give some part of my profits to me. I have to give the profits back to Domino's owner. So why not? Let me shut this down. Let me open another business, maybe in a similar manner, similar name, similar logo, and then I will get to keep all of the profits. So this is the disadvantage that I can face. A conflict of interest or disputes can happen. And this leads to my last point also, that it may turn into a competitor. So when somebody else knows all of my secret recipes, my secret processes, there are high chances that they can become a competitor of mine. Maybe they make some tweaks, they make some changes, maybe they make some improvements, and then they become a bigger business than me. So these advantages will be there from the perspective of the franchisor, from the one who is giving the franchisee to the other people. Now we will also talk about the flip side of the coin, the other person. The other person will be the one who takes the franchisee, right? So for example, if let's suppose Simi has taken a franchisee of McDonald's, so she is the owner of the McDonald's outlet, right? So a person who is opening the outlet will get the brand demand. So all the people who love McDonald's, they are going to come to Simi's outlet, but Simi has to follow the strict rules. Who, set by whom? The people at McDonald's who set these terms and conditions when Simi went out to get the franchisee. So what will be the advantages? She will get to be associated with a global brand. So lots and lots of customers will come to Simi's McDonald's. Technical expertise will be available because I will be telling Simi exactly how to do the work, how to make the French fries, how to make the burgers. This will also be lesser risky because you have proven business model. I know that McDonald's all around the world is a very successful chain, and so I face a lesser risk over here. But again, there will be some problems also. All investment will be done by Simi. So just in case the McDonald's does not pick up, just in case the sales are not good, Simi is going to face the biggest loss. All of the investment is done by you, so all risk is also yours. You have to follow the strict rules and guidelines which will be set by McDonald's head office. You will also have the geographical boundaries. What do you mean by that? You have a McDonald's outlet, but are you in US? No, you're in India. So all of the restrictions because of the geography are also going to apply. Maybe some of the rules can be put up. One rule is there in US, that rule does not apply in India. One rule is in India, but that rule does not apply in US. So a very clear example which you people would have also noticed. So if you talk about US markets, in US they sell all sorts of meat. Chicken meat is available, mutton is available, pork is available, beef is available. But whenever you go to McDonald's over here in India, next time do notice this if you still haven't noticed this. McDonald's has put up this board. All of their outlets put up a board that we do not sell any pork or beef products. Why is it so? Because beef is something which the religion that we follow, majority of the Indians that we follow the religion of Hinduism, beef is something which we consider as very bad because cows are meant to be worshipped by us. So we do not eat their meats. Similarly, why is pork banned? Pork is banned because the Muslim population that lives in India, they have this belief that pork is not, that pig should not be consumed. So both of these meat are banned over here in India. At McDonald's, when you go, you will neither find any product which contains beef, nor will you find any product which contains pork. So they put up this board. So this is the point of geographical boundaries, that the rules and regulations, they will be different. So the way that we operate in US will be different from the way that we operate here in India. Another thing is that Simi has to pay a royalty on the revenue. So apart from the one time a huge amount of money that Simi will pay to McDonald's to get their name, she will also have to continue to pay a royalty. What do we mean by royalty? It could be a fixed percentage. So it could be, let's suppose, 10% of the revenue. So it will be very simply written in the contract which Simi has signed with McDonald's that whatever revenue, if for example you're making $100 of revenue, you will be giving 10% of $100, that is, rupees, that is 10 rupees will come to us in the form of royalty. So no matter how much amount of revenue Simi makes, the amount of money which she has to pay as royalty will also increase. Then there's also a chance that the franchisor, that means the head office of McDonald's, may suddenly want to cancel the agreement. So Simi will not have a lot of choice over there. She will have to agree to it. So these are the perspectives from both a franchisor as well as a franchisee. Archit says the availability of local expertise will be an advantage for the franchisee. Yes, definitely. So if Simi is working over here in India, then definitely Simi knows the Indian market very well. So Simi can give some suggestions to McDonald's in US that, hey, listen, I am thinking that my people really like spices a lot. So what we can do is we can introduce peri peri fries. We can introduce a masala tikki or a masala burger, which the people are going to like very much. So definitely very good point, Archit. The franchisee is going to have a lot of local knowledge, which can help them get a lot of local business. Very good. So these are the points from both perspectives, franchisor as well as franchisee. Any queries still here? Are you all with me? Okay, great. So now we move forward to competitive strategies. That means if I want to compete against my competitors, if I want to survive in a very tough competition, then what are some of the strategies that I can use so that I can beat my competition, I can deal with my competition. So some of them we have already discussed before also as the previous parts of this chapter. We can go for the cost leadership. Cost leadership is when I am offering the products at the extremely low prices. So you people would have seen we have D-Mart here in India. D-Mart is the place where they focus on selling the low cost products at very low prices. So why do people go there? Because the things are available at a very cheap price over there. This is one strategy. Another strategy is doing differentiation. Differentiation means setting some of the features which are unique, which set you apart from the other competitors that you have. Or you enter into a niche. What is niche? Niche is a particular category of people that you are targeting. So Tesla is the classic example. Tesla is differentiating itself. It's setting apart from the other competitors with the help of the technology that they are bringing and with the help of the brand that they have created. So everyone all around the world knows about Tesla. They know how good they are with the technology. They know that it's a very good company. This company is not going to go anywhere. It's backed by Elon Musk. It's owned by Elon Musk. So they know that the products that they are going to sell will be of a good quality. So these are the two strategies which we have studied earlier also as part of this chapter. If at all, when I want to survive in a competitive environment, either I set myself apart, I show my customers why exactly they should come to me over my competitors, or I can start to sell the things at extremely cheaper prices. Both of these strategies are generally going to help me deal with my competition. Then we have some specific strategies also. One specific strategy that we have is called as divestment. Do you people understand the meaning of divestment? Anybody? What do we mean by divestment? Yes, you people are absolutely right. Right, Tanisha. It's the opposite of investment. Yeah. And Archit, also, you are right. That means when I'm taking out my investment, I had invested my money, but I'm taking out my money from that. So, guys, whenever, let's suppose there's a company, they are operating their business in UAE. Now they want to shut down their business. That means they want to exit from UAE. They want to continue working in India itself. So, whenever a company wants to exit a country, it will not be very easy because I will have to face the legal hurdles. I will have to pay the cost related hurdles. What could be some of the examples? There can be some legal or contractual conditions. Maybe I have entered into some long term lease agreement. So when I opened my business in Dubai, I had signed a lease agreement for my office rentals. So in that agreement, I have said that I will be using that office space, taking that on a lease for 10 years. But now only 6 years are over. 4 years are still remaining. So then I have signed the contract that I will take the lease for 10 years, but the time is still remaining. So it will be difficult for me to cancel out this contract. Another thing is I will have to pay the heavy redundancy payments. What do we mean by redundancy? Whenever the employees are getting laid off by the company, it's mandatory from the government that you have to pay them some sort of extra pay because you are laying them off. So high costs will have to be borne as a company if you are laying off your employees. Another problem you can face is that if the company is loss making, nobody is going to want to buy your company. So there will be no buyer. Why? Because if the company is loss making, nobody would want to buy a company like that. And even if anyone wants to buy a company like that, what do you people think? Will they be ready to pay a lot of money to buy a loss making company? What do you guys feel? If you are buying a company, will you be able to pay a very big price if you know that the company is loss making? Would you do that? No, right? So even if they get the offers, those will be low offers. The buyers will offer a very low valuation for a loss-making business. Then, what are some of the ways by which we can do the divestment? Now we have understood that yes, this will be difficult, but what could be some of the solutions? How exactly can we divest? So we can divest either by going for a management buyout. Like the name itself is telling you, who will buy out the company? Management will buy out the company. So the people who are existing managers of the company, they will be buying it out. Right now, who is the real owner of the company? It is the shareholders. So from the shareholders, managers will buy the company. So shareholders will be paid money by the managers. Managers will pay money for it and they will get the ownership of the company. This is one option. Another option that we have is selling the brand to a rival. Rival means my competitor. So if I am Domino's, I want to shut down my business, I can sell my company to Pizza Hut. If I'm Coca-Cola, I want to shut down my business, I can sell my company to PepsiCo. So this is the second option. Third option is wind up. What do we mean by wind up? You shut down your company, you close your company, and you liquidate the assets. Liquidate means you sell the assets. So if whatever assets that I had with me, plant, equipment, machinery, building, I sell all of those items and then I shut down the business all together. So these are some of the methods that I can use to do the divestment. If I want to remove my investment, take out my investment, then these are some of the options which are available with me. Now we will also discuss if I want to do a turnaround. Turnaround means the company is making losses, I know, but I do not want to sell my company. I want to get the things onto the right path. So then I will be using the turnaround strategies. What are some of the ways that I can do that? Consider a loss-making airline who is restructuring itself to survive. Guys, we recently saw an example over here in India. Do you recollect a loss-making airline which was restructured to survive better? We had a loss-making airline which is now restructured. Yes, very good, Archit. This was Air India. Air India, from its very beginning, it was founded by the Tatas. It used to be a private company. But then the government came up with some of the rules later, because of which they had taken the Air India as a public company. So the government bought out the company. So the government made it the official airlines of the government of India. So they operated a few years, but no matter what they did, the company never turned into a profit-making company. Continuously, it was making losses as a government business. So what did the government do? I think not very many years ago, they handed over the ownership back to the Tatas. So it was privatized again from being a public company, from being a government company. It was sold back to the Tatas. If you people do not know a lot in detail about it, do give this case study a read. I'm sure there are plenty of YouTube videos around also. You can check those out. It's a very interesting case study. So because they were continuing to make losses, the government decided to sell it off back to the private players so that they can run it and possibly make it into a profit-making company. So what are some of the ways that I can do that? If my company is making losses right now, how can I restructure it so that it can stop making those losses, return to the break-even point, and then ultimately eventually make profits also? So the very first thing will be to change the senior management immediately. So maybe I bring in a new CEO to drive the change. Secondly, I will try to find out what is the root cause. That what is the main reason why I am making losses. So once I find out that reason, I eliminate that reason completely. So if there is any specific route, so if let's suppose Air India is operating one flight that is from New Delhi to London, this flight is making the most amount of losses. So we stop this flight. If there are any products that we are selling because of which we are making losses, so we stop manufacturing that product. Then the third thing that we can do is extreme cost reductions. So whatever cost that I'm incurring at the company, the rent that I'm paying, the overheads that I'm paying, the staff salaries that I'm paying, I will try to do the extreme reductions in that. So I will renegotiate my rent. So for example, if my office rent is right now $500,000 per year, I will try to reduce the rent with the same landlord, or maybe I will find another property where the rent profit will be a lesser amount. And other overheads, the admin related costs. If there are 50,000 employees working, I might lay off 10,000 employees and only keep that number of employees which is actually needed to do my work. So I can try to focus on reduction of my cost. Another thing that I can try to do is gain the support of the key stakeholders. So some of the key stakeholders could be the banks. Why banks? Because if you are a loss-making company, chances are you would have taken some debt. So over the debt, you have to keep paying your interest, irrespective whether you're making profits or you're making losses. So we can have a discussion with the stakeholders. I can try to convince the bank to maybe extend the loan for me, maybe lower down the interest rates while I am trying to recover myself, right? Another thing is financial restructuring. So maybe right now I have a lot of debt. So even if I make losses, I have to pay interest on that debt. But now what I do is I try to convert that debt into equity. So I offer the public to buy the shares in my company. And let's suppose I have a loan worth $50 million. So now I have received the money from the shareholders. They have given me $50 million. I use this money to repay my debt. So now whatever debt I used to have, that has been converted into my equity. Or I can do refinancing, changing the way by which I am getting my money. If I was taking a loan, as soon as that loan is repaid, I may look for other sources of finance. So these are some of the ways a company can use to have the turnaround strategy. Turnaround means if I'm earning losses right now at the moment, incurring losses at the moment, what should I do so that I'm able to turn around? Turnaround means reversal from losses into profits. So these are some of the strategies, some of the steps that I can follow if I want to convert from a loss-making entity to a profit-making company. Are you all good till here? Any queries, any concerns, guys? You're all with me? Simi, Tanisha? Okay. Great. So now we move forward to the next concept that we have. This is the benchmarking and the cultural web model. So we will first be talking about benchmarking. Now guys, I'm sure you people would have heard this term before, benchmarking. Can anyone tell me in a very simple layman language, what's the meaning of benchmarking? Right, absolutely right, Simi. Setting a standard, okay, a limit, something to compare to. Yes. So standards are something that you compare yourself with. So for example, if your height is 160 centimeters, you compare it with the average height. So if it is above the average height, then you say it's good. If it's below the average height, then it's a bad thing, right? So similarly, benchmarking also works. Benchmarking helps you do a comparison. It sets a standard so that you can compare your performance and find out how well you have performed. Now, the way that you set your standard, the way that you set your benchmark, that can be on different basis. Either I can set internal benchmarks. Internal means I do not go outside of the company. Whatever I have been doing previously, I compare myself with my previous performance, my historic performance. So I compare this month's sale to the last month, this year's sales to the last year's sales. So this is internal benchmarking, right? Whenever I am doing the comparisons with my competitors. So for example, if I am Domino's, I am comparing myself with Pizza Hut. If I am Pepsi, I am comparing myself with Coca-Cola. Those are industry benchmarks. So here I compare myself with the market leader. So for example, if I have opened a platform for online shopping, so I can compare my delivery time with the Amazon's standard delivery times, the average delivery times. Or if I want to have the world-class benchmarks, world-class means something which not just one company has one particular player has mastered. You can have a look at the things which the entire world looks up to. So the world-class benchmarks is Toyota's lean practices. So the way that they engineer their cars, it's very different. So entire car makers around the world, they use these benchmarks because they know that the cars that we produce using the lean practices, they will be the best of the cars that can be ever produced. So the way that you decide to set your benchmarks, these are the different categories of the benchmarks which the companies can set. And why do we set the benchmark? To do a comparison. How well am I performing? Am I in line with my competitors? Am I improving over the years or not? Am I providing the services as per the world class standards or not? So, for example, if you talk about some of the world's best in the airlines industry, you could say Emirates is the best around the world. Emirates, Lufthansa, Qatar Airways, these are all considered to be the world class airlines around the world, right? So, this is the world class benchmarks. Now, we will be talking about lean practices. It's basically, let me see if I can get a video on that. Allow me just one moment. No, it's not a part of our syllabus. It's just a way of giving you people a real life example. So have a look over here.
Let's say your business is doing.
Are you guys able to hear the audio? Okay.
Let's say your business is doing well and you're thinking of expanding. That's great, but it's also the riskiest time for your business. In fact, many businesses don't survive the transition. Should you throw money at the problem by investing in new equipment or hiring more people? Should you make your staff work more overtime? Your answers to questions like these can make or break your business. And that's where Lean comes in. Lean is a philosophy about delivering value from your customer's perspective, eliminating waste, and continuously improving your processes. Lean can radically change the way you do business. Lean management is based on 4 principles. The first principle is pull. Rather than producing as much as possible, customer demand pulls goods or services through the manufacturing process. This minimizes overproduction, inventory, and ultimately working capital. The second is one-piece flow. Focusing on one single piece at a time minimizes work in progress, process interruptions, lead and waiting time, while increasing quality and flexibility. The third is tact. It's the heartbeat of a lean system. It's how fast you need to manufacture a product to meet customer demand. Tact allows us to balance work content, achieve a continuous flow, and respond flexibly to changes in the marketplace. And the fourth is zero defects. Mistakes happen, but a lean company doesn't pass on defects. Mistakes from previous steps must be fixed before going on. Combined with a robust continuous improvement process, the 4 principles of lean management will help your company stay ahead of the competition in a constantly changing marketplace. So, if you're ready to begin your lean journey, contact us today. Let us
Okay, so you saw how this works in the real life. This is not a part of our syllabus. It's just one way of giving you people an example that the way that this technology has been developed, the way that Toyota uses this has been a benchmark for the other car manufacturers also to follow so that they can become the world leaders in producing the best of the cars and automobiles, right? So these are the different types of benchmarks that we can use. Are you all with me till here? Simi, Tanisha, all well? Okay. Now let's move towards the cultural web model. This is actually going to be nearly the second last topic for today. So for this also, I would like to show you people a very nice video with the help of which you will understand what exactly is the cultural web model. Then I will tell you when do we use it, why do we use it. So just allow me a moment while I share my screen.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving deep into something we all think we know about, company culture. But I'm not talking about the surface level stuff. We're going to peel back the layers and look at the invisible architecture that really, truly makes a company what it is. Let's get right into it. So let me ask you a question. When you hear the words company culture, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the free snacks in the kitchen? The ping pong table in the break room? Maybe casual Fridays? Look, those things are nice for sure, but they are just the window dressing. They're the absolute tip of the iceberg. And the real culture, the stuff that matters, is happening way down below the surface. You see, real company culture is this invisible, powerful force. It's in the air. It quietly shapes every single thing that happens in an organization. How people talk to each other, how big decisions get made, and yeah, ultimately, whether that company skyrockets to success or just fizzles out. It's the unwritten rules, the shared assumptions, the gut feelings. And because you can't see it, it's incredibly hard to get a handle on, let alone change. And that, right there, is the big problem, isn't it? Culture is literally everywhere, but it's so hard to define. It's kind of like trying to describe the wind. You can feel it, you can see its effects, but you can't just grab it and put it in a box. So to make this invisible force visible, we need a map. We need a tool that lets us see what's actually going on. And that's where the cultural web comes in. This is a brilliant framework developed by two thinkers, Jerry Johnson and Kevin Scholes, specifically designed to help us diagnose and understand the messy, complex reality of an organization's culture. It essentially gives us a set of X-ray goggles, breaking culture down into 6 distinct but deeply interconnected parts. It lets us see the whole picture. So, the cultural web is built around these 6 essential elements. Think of them as the threads that weave together to create the fabric of a company's identity. We're going to go through each one, and we'll start with what might be the most human and powerful element of all, the stories people tell. First up, we have stories. And I'm not just talking about corporate PR. These are the legends, the myths, the cautionary tales that get passed around from employee to employee, often over lunch or coffee. They're about the heroes who save the day, the villains who mess things up, and the epic successes or failures. These stories reveal what a company actually values, far more than any glossy mission statement ever could. A perfect example of this is Southwest Airlines. That place is famous for its stories. You hear tales of flight attendants telling jokes during the safety briefing, or gate agents moving heaven and earth to help a passenger make a connection. These aren't just feel-good anecdotes. They're constantly reinforcing the core idea that Southwest is a fun and friendly place. The stories are culture in action. Now, those stories are brought to life through the next element, rituals and routines. This is all about the way things are done around here. It's the daily stuff, the stuff that feels normal. How are meetings conducted? Are they formal and stuffy or a free-for-all? How do people greet each other in the morning? These everyday behaviors are the bedrock of culture. Just think about Google's legendary 20% time. For a long time, they had a policy where engineers could spend 1 day a week working on whatever project they were passionate about. That wasn't just a perk. It was a powerful routine. It sent a crystal clear message that this company values creativity, experimentation, and innovation. They literally built it into the work schedule. Okay, now let's talk about the most visible, tangible parts of the web, symbols. This is everything your eyes can see. We're talking logos, of course, but also the office layout. Is it open plan or a maze of cubicles? What's the dress code? Are people in suits or hoodies? Even the specific acronyms and jargon a company uses are powerful symbols of who they are. And you absolutely cannot talk about symbols without talking about Apple. I mean, come on. From the moment you pick up one of their products with its clean, minimalist design to the second you walk into one of their bright, airy retail stores, everything is a symbol. It screams a culture that is completely obsessed with simplicity, elegance, and quality. They don't even have to say a word. All right, moving from the visible stuff to the invisible blueprint, we have the organizational structure. Now, this is way more than just a boring org chart. The structure tells you how power flows and how people are expected to work together. Is it a tall, rigid pyramid where everything has to go up the chain of command? Or is it a flat, decentralized network where ideas can come from anywhere? And that structure has a huge impact on behavior. Think about a classic tech startup. They often have a very flat structure. That's a symbol in itself, signaling a culture built on speed, agility, and shared responsibility. Now contrast that with, say, a huge traditional bank with its deep, rigid hierarchy. That structure signals a culture of control, process, and risk aversion. And what enforces that structure? Well, that brings us to control systems. This one is huge. This is all about what gets measured, what gets monitored, and most importantly, what gets rewarded. You can forget all the pretty words on the Our Values poster. If you want to know what a company really values, look at what people get bonuses for. Let's take a sales team, for example. If the control system is all about massive bonuses for the top individual performers, what kind of culture are you going to get? You're going to get a cutthroat, competitive, every person for themselves environment. But if you change that control system to reward team-based sales targets, you're suddenly going to foster a much more collaborative and supportive culture. The control system literally dictates the behavior. It's that powerful. And that leads us to our final and maybe the most fascinating element: power structures. This is about who really calls the shots. And listen, it's often not the person with the fanciest title on their business card. In every organization, there are individuals or groups who have the real influence, whose opinions carry the most weight, no matter what the official org chart says. A classic, easy-to-understand example is a family business. You might have a CEO with the official title, but everybody in that company knows that the founder, mom, dad, or grandpa, is the one who holds the real power and has the final say. Or think about a hospital. A group of highly respected senior surgeons might have way more influence over key medical decisions than the official hospital administrator. That's the real power structure. Okay, so we've looked at all 6 elements on their own, but the real magic happens when you see how they all weave together. So let's look at a true masterclass in building an intentional culture. The online retailer Zappos. They basically made their unique culture the core of their entire business strategy. Just look at how beautifully this all connects at Zappos. The stories, they had the legendary tale of a customer service call that lasted 10 hours. That story was backed up by their control systems because they didn't measure call times, they measured whether reps created wow moments. And who had the ability to do that? The power structure empowered those reps to do whatever it took to make a customer happy. Every single thread, the stories, the symbols, the controls, it all wove together to reinforce one single powerful idea: total customer obsession. So, now that we've seen how it all works, this is where the cultural web becomes an incredibly powerful tool for you. It's a diagnostic lens. It lets you look past the official slogans and the marketing fluff and see what's really, truly going on under the hood of a company. And this is the ultimate test. A company can plaster "our values, our innovation, and teamwork" all over their walls. But then you use the cultural web, and what do you find? The stories are all about lone wolf heroes. The control systems only give bonuses for individual achievement, and the organizational structure is a rigid hierarchy that kills collaboration. The web reveals that massive gap between what a company says it is and what it actually is. So I want you to try this. Use this framework as a lens to look at your own workplace, or a company you admire, or even one you're thinking of joining. Start looking for the stories. Pay attention to the daily routines. Ask yourself, what behavior really gets rewarded here? Who holds the actual power? Once you start looking through this lens, that invisible culture suddenly becomes very, very clear. So leave you with this one last thought to chew on. Every single organization has a cultural web. It's there, whether it was designed on purpose or just grew wild over time. The only real question is, what story does your company's web tell? And maybe more importantly, is it telling the story you want it to?
Okay, guys. So coming back this video that I just showed you, it talked to you all about the cultural web model. Did you guys understand when exactly do we have to use this model, the cultural web model? In the video, it was mentioned multiple times. Anyone who was able to capture that? When do we use this model? Come on, guys, think and tell me, when do I use this model, the cultural web model? Simi says to analyze who holds more power. So basically, it was told to you people in the video multiple times, guys, that why do we use the cultural web model? A company on their website, they can say we do this, we value innovation, we value teamwork, we value creativity. But does that actually happen in the company or not? That you can find out with the help of cultural web model. So why do we use it? We use to analyze the culture at any company. If I want to understand how things work, what is the company's culture like? So then to analyze the culture, I use the culture web model. So for example, in a family business, understanding who holds the real power before the processes are changing, this you will be able to understand with the help of the cultural web model. So what do you do exactly with this model? First, you analyze their culture. So you had 6 different components that are part of it. You observe the routines, the symbols, the behavior. Then you build the trust. You win the confidence of your senior leaders. Then you consult with the leaders, whoever are the influential managers, the ones who have a say in deciding what will happen at the company. You involve those people, and then ultimately you change anything which is needed to be done in the culture. So you implement the changes gradually. Whenever you are changing the culture, it will not be possible to change the culture overnight. So in small phases, we do the change so that the employees will not resist, because culture is the way things are working in a company. So people who are working in a company for a number of years in a particular manner, if you suddenly tell them to change overnight, they may react negatively to it. They may want to quit the company. So you bring out these changes in a slow, gradual manner so that they do not resist from making this particular change. So when exactly do we use the cultural web model? We use it when we want to analyze the culture of any company. All clear? I hope that the video was helpful to teach you people about what are the different components of it and how it's put to the real life. Yes, all clear till here? Simi and Tanisha, you guys are with me? Okay, great. So now we head towards our last topic for today, which will also bring us to the end of the very first chapter. This is where we are going to talk about the orientation of the culture. Orientation means where is my culture inclined towards? What does my organization value the most? So in the companies where finance, the money matters the most, we say that they have a financial culture. So for example, if you have a look at any investment bank, they will focus a lot on their profits. They will focus a lot on their returns. So nothing else matters. You have to be profitable. You have to make good returns for the company. That is the financial culture that they follow. Another example, another way the companies care about, another thing that they could care about, the one thing could be service. So if you see Taj Hotels, that's one of the hotel chains over here in India. It's quite global. You will see Taj Hotels in remaining parts of the world also, apart from just India. So they prioritize the experiences of their customers. So their main focus is upon providing the best possible service. So we call them that their culture is a service culture. They emphasize as much as possible on the experience of the customers, the service that their customers are receiving. Then Another organization may have a culture which is very focused towards the role, that whatever hierarchy we have set, we have to do the decisions, we have to do our operations in that particular set hierarchy only. So what could be an example? The government departments which have a strict hierarchy and the job descriptions, that if this is the top manager, there are two junior managers below this person, and then junior managers have further employees beneath them. So if one employee wants to take some decision, he will first have to go to junior manager. Junior manager will then have to go to his senior manager. So this is the role culture, where the things that you're doing are not very important. You just care that the person who has the right hierarchy, you are following your job descriptions. If I want to do XYZ thing, but it's not a part of my job description, I will not be able to do particular that item or that action. So this is the role culture, where the emphasis is you only do the things which are a part of your job role, which are a part of the hierarchy. Another sort of preference can be given to the task. So some companies where it's very important to close the task which they have been given, there you will see that the task culture is followed. The best example will be a consulting firm. So how do consulting firms work is, whenever they get a client, they have to solve the problem of the client. So what do? They form the project teams. So if, let's suppose, you are BCG, Boston Consulting Group, so you're a very big consulting company, you have received multiple consulting requests from your different clients. One of the clients, let's suppose, could be Amazon. So Amazon is facing an issue. They have come to you for a solution. So what you will do is, BCG will prepare a team for Amazon. This project team's only work is to solve the problem which is being faced at Amazon. If, let's suppose, Flipkart has also come over there, a separate team will be formed for Flipkart. Amazon team will not work on Flipkart. Flipkart team will not work on Amazon, because the task that they have is to solve the problem upon the client that they are working on. So they have a task culture. Their focus always is to get the task done which they have been assigned. So Amazon team will be working upon Amazon, Flipkart team will be working upon the Flipkart related problems. So this is how the culture, depending upon what we prioritize, this is how we say that the culture is oriented. If my focus is money, I can say my organization has a financial culture. If my focus is to give the best experience to the customers, I will say it's a service culture. If the focus in my organization is that everyone should always follow the hierarchy, follow their job descriptions, I will say it's a role culture. And if I am being told that whatever team you are part of, just solve those problems, then I will say my company follows a task culture. So these are the different orientations of the culture depending upon what we prioritize. With this, guys, we have come to an end to chapter number 1. If you people have any queries still here, please let me know. This is where we are going to conclude today's session. Are you all with me? Any queries, any concerns, guys? Okay. Great. Archit says, should we skim read from the book? So Archit, the books are extremely very lengthy. Categorically, when we were meeting for the orientation of the batch, when I told you how you can pass the SBL paper, I told you people to stay away from the text from the study hub. So even if you people are self-studying, just try to get some of the notes which will help you to go through the content in a short manner, because the study hub content is way too elaborate. You will spend a huge amount of time spending upon the syllabus, so that you will get very less time for drafting practice. Same is both of the Kaplan and the BPP. They are very lengthy texts, unnecessarily lengthy, which you do not really need for your paper. So as part of the success batch at Being ACCA, I have created the notes for you. They are compressed. They are only what you need for your SBL paper, and not all of the random lengthy explanations, extra topics which you will find in the BPP or the Kaplan or over the study hub also. So that is what we will be using as part of the success batch. Right, so this was the last demo session that I have conducted. From Monday onwards, all the sessions will just be conducted for the enrolled students. So if you wish to continue, if you enjoyed, you resonated with the style of my teaching, you can get in touch with me if you want to register or enroll for the SBL Success Batch for June 2026. I wish you all the very best. Do we exactly need to remember or just be clear with the terms? Tanisha, you just have to be clear with the terms. You should be able to apply the things when it comes to drafting your answers. That is all that is needed. This is just giving you a background knowledge with the help of which you'll be able to draft good answers. Archit says, so do we need to write notes or your notes will be enough? So the notes, whatever I'm using as class notes, they will be provided to you as part of the success batch. But if you want to create your own notes, you're more than welcome to do that, because that will help you with your revision. I will be helping you. I will be providing you people with the revision notes also, but it will be the best to create your own notes because you recall more if you write down the things on your own, right? So I will recommend all of you to prepare your own notes also. All right, guys. So I think I have solved all of your queries, and I'll see you people the next time. I wish you all the very best. Enjoy the weekend. We will now meet on Monday, same time. Bye bye.